and we have two items that need to be begun before we can officially open our meeting. The first would be the administration of the oath to the newest members. I will let Mayor Marsh speak to that.
Good evening, everyone. I have given an oath which has been signed by Kenneth Dornick and Richard Glasser to join the board, and we are grateful to have them for their support alongside all of you. So, gentlemen, welcome aboard.
Thank you. And with that, I would open the floor for nominations for officers for this year, beginning with president. Does anyone have any nominations for president for the board?
Nominate Alan.
Mr. Dyward has nominated Alan Campbell. Is there a second?
I would second.
I'll show Mr.
Glasser.
Thank you, apologize. So Mr. Glasser is seconding. Mr. Campbell, are you willing to accept that nomination?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell is willing to accept. Is there any discussion amongst the board members? There's been a nomination.
Nominations to be closed.
Nominations, there's a motion for nominations to be closed by Mr. Middendorf. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Dornich. Motion to vote, made by Mr. Middendorf.
Yes,
Any seconds?
Second.
Second, all in favor of Mr. Campbell as president, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Mr. Campbell is now the president. Mr. Campbell, I will allow you to conduct the election of your vice president.
I will take a motion for nominations for vice president.
Somebody's got to do it, boys.
I nominate Phil.
Phil Dyward has been nominated. Is there a second?
Second.
Put Ken Dornich down as the second. Mr. Dyward, do you accept?
I do.
He accepts. Any discussion? No discussion. Move to close the vote.
I'll make that motion.
Roy moved to close. Any seconds?
Second.
Dornick seconds that. All in favor of closing the votes?
Aye.
Okay. Any now motion to vote.
So
Dyward is the vice president. Okay. There's a motion to vote. Second. So Ken is the second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That passes. Your president is Mr. Campbell. Mr. Dyward is your vice. Mr. Campbell, I will allow you to open the normal meeting.
Today is Tuesday, July 5th, 2022, and the time being 7 p.m. The meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals is called to order. At this time, please silence all electronic devices. To comply with Title 6 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the city requests participants in this meeting complete a voluntary anonymous survey that is available on the table in the back of the room. Now stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, I will call for the roll call.
Roy. Present.
Alan,
Present.
Dick,
Present.
Ken, Phil.
Present.
You have the meeting minutes in front of you from February of this year. Make a motion to approve the minutes from February of this year.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor of approving the minutes for this year, say aye.
Aye.
Same sign for no. Minutes have been approved for this year, or for this February. Old business, we have none. New business, call Sarah up.
Good evening. This evening we have Tom and Karen Stricker,
who currently reside at 525 South Broadway Street, coming before you seeking a variance for a front yard setback. They are wanting to build a home on this vacant property where a home had existed before, at 212 West Goby Street. They are seeking just a front yard setback due to the fact that is an older addition, and you can see a lot of the other houses along that street set up close to the sidewalk. So that is what they are here, is just seeking a front yard setback on that. And I will have them come up, Tom and Karen.
Good evening. The house we're looking to build isn't gonna be out as far as the houses that are on that street as well. We're wanting to, I think, you probably have the paperwork, but it's gonna be around 12 to 15 feet away from the sidewalk. The designs right now we're looking at is putting a porch on the front of it, but we'll still be behind where the houses are at on the street now.
Will it be behind where the previous house sat?
Yes, the previous house was even with all the houses on the street now, which puts the sidewalk a foot away from the porch, which is all of them have a step out there. So this will probably give us about a 6 foot yard in front of the porch.
And all you need is the front, right?
Yeah, because everything else, the lot's supposed to be 70, and the lot's not that wide anyway, but we'll be inside, 6 on each side for sure, plus extra on the side next to the neighbor.
Is there anybody from the audience that has anything?
Is there a garage there already now?
Yeah, there's a
Looks like
garage
there's
up
two
against the,
buildings.
so there's a garage against the back alley, and then there was a carport that was attached to the house.
Okay.
And we just enclosed it, and then with looking at everything, we was thinking, if we would've known ahead of time it was, need to go farther back, we wouldn't have even enclosed it. But building up against it and then coming away.
And I would just remind you all and mention to our 2 newest members, so the findings that you are making with regard to any Board of Zoning of Appeals variance is that you are finding that there's 5 factors, that this is found in 3674-918.4. You are finding that the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. 2, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. 3, you're finding that the need of the variance arises from some condition peculiar to the property involved. 4, you are finding that the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will constitute an unnecessary hardship if applied to the property from which the variance is sought. And 5, that the approval does not interfere substantially with the comprehensive plan adopted under the series of that under your normal laws and codes. So if you approve a variance, you are finding that those requirements have been met. If those requirements have been met, then you should not find the variance. So just wanted to make sure that everyone was familiar with that statutory code provision.
Sir, excuse me, have you had any concerns, complaints from any neighbors?
No, they've, a couple of them have come up and asked us what we were doing, and we told them, and they're like, well, yeah, it's better than what it is now, so.
Yeah, I have not had any calls or anything either, so.
So you're gonna butt up against the existing pole barn and that green building behind, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been with Mr. Helmick, and he's went over and done some measurements, and him and, I was on the phone with her earlier, but they work together, kind of helping with doing designs on houses and stuff. So he knows more or less what we gotta do as far as foundation, because we're gonna put a basement underneath it as well.
Okay.
So he knows what we gotta have that part of it, but.
Okay.
Anything else from any of the board members? Anything from any of the public? take a motion to approve this variance.
So moved.
Second.
Vote, all in favor of the variance, vote aye.
I would say, I would suggest you maybe do a roll call vote on a variance.
Oh, roll call vote on variance. Thank you.
Roy,
Yes.
Alan,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Ken? Yes. Phil?
Yes.
Thank you.
Your next variance, the next item on your agenda, is a slightly different beast. This is, Mr. Spencer actually came before you previously requesting a variance related to, I believe, a carport and some other issues that are related to his property. At that time, you had previously denied his request. He subsequently obtained counsel, and that counsel asked for an opportunity to appeal that to you, to come before you again and ask for a reconsideration of that issue, and potentially present additional evidence or argument that would change that, or that could potentially change your position with regard to that. So you have previously denied this variance, but this is an opportunity for you to hear from his counsel as well as potentially consider any information that maybe wasn't available or had not been previously presented when he did it individually by himself. The other thing that I want to make sure that the record reflects and that the minutes reflect is that I have previously represented Mr. Spencer in another matter. It is unrelated to this issue. It is unrelated to any of the things that we are going forward with today. I do not believe there's a conflict. Mr. Spencer's counsel and I have spoken, but if any of the board members are uncomfortable with my involvement due to that prior representation of Mr. Spencer in a different regard, please voice that opinion now, and I will step out and you can proceed forward, and I will not do anything with regard to that. I just want to make sure that everybody is as transparent as possible. So if you guys are all okay, and Mr. Spencer hasn't indicated that he wants me to step out.
Thanks for the explanation, I'm fine with it.
I'm fine.
Okay. Then I will let Sarah commence.
Okay, so back, I sent you all this information out and kind of explained to the newest board members back in February what happened. Mr. Spencer, it was brought to our attention, we noticed this carport was already put up. I contacted him in regards to it didn't meet our ordinances for two reasons. It was an accessory structure. He already has an accessory structure on his property, that being of a shed barn style in his backyard, and it did not meet the setbacks, and that part of his carport is actually in city right-of-way. At that time, he presented his case. You all heard, you denied the variance. On April 22nd, I sent Mr. Spencer a letter stating of the previous BZA meeting on February 1st that he came before you to seek the variance for that, and it was denied, and he was told at that time he needed to remove the carport. As of April 22nd, when the letter went out, the carport was still up. Also, since the time of him filing for the variance before the BZA in February 1st and July 1st, there has been some additional, a couple additional things added to this carport. Looks like maybe some solar powered weather thing. There's been some seeding of grass and stuff around that area. So I included a picture of back at the beginning of the year versus the picture now. So those are just some things to take into consideration. After Mr. Spencer received the letter in April, he came into my office and I spoke with him. He said he was going to get an attorney to appeal the decision. So that's what brings us here this evening. So everybody up to date. Any questions for me on that information? Okay.
Mr. Spencer is represented by Ethan Runnebaum.
How's it going, you all? As was just stated a couple times here, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Spencer. I do have some materials that I'm going to be passing out as I kind of go along here, so bear with me. I don't have copies for everybody. I wasn't sure how many people would be here tonight, so I apologize about that. I am going to start. I'm going to hand out a couple of memos that I prepared for tonight. So if you guys would be so gracious as to share, I would appreciate it. I only got about 4 extra copies here. And this is just going to summarize what I'm going to talk about, so if you guys don't want to read it, if you want to come back to it, feel free to. I just want to start off by saying that, the reason that Mr. Spencer requested this land use variance, or, more specifically, a variance from the setback and accessory requirements of the Decatur County ordinances is regards to Mr. Spencer's, ongoing disability. So at this point, Mr. Spencer is requesting that he be granted this variance so that he can have a carport that would make it more accessible for him to reach his vehicles during inclement weather. So Mr. Spencer currently suffers from psoriatic arthritis. As a result, he has an escalated fall risk. The concern here is that if Mr. Spencer does, have a fall, related to this, that he may not be able to work going forward, and thus would be forced to apply for Social Security disability, which is the last thing that Mr. Spencer wants to have to do. Okay. In regards to the original request of the variance, there was, as Ms. Hamer, very eloquently laid out, the stated reasoning for the denial was that it did not comply with the accessory and the setback requirements. But as Mr. Stephen, so graciously pointed out earlier when the other variance was being requested, the consideration that need to be made, when these variances are being considered is not whether, what's asked for complies, with local zoning ordinances. In fact, the reason for this variance request is to differ from those local ordinances. Fair to say? So Mr. Spencer, right now, he has kind of 2 issues with the way that the decision that was made. The first is, in regard to the fact that he doesn't believe that Indiana law was considered when looking at his request. So Indiana Code, and I kind of outlined this for you, going on to the next section, they're in bold there, but Indiana Code section 3674, 9118.5 outlines the requirements for a zoning ordinance, for a variance to a zoning request. Now, this is a little bit different than what Mr. Stevens summarized earlier. I don't know if he was looking at a different statute, but I did check the currentness on this, and I believe it to be current up to today. But there's 3 requirements that I could see based on the statute, which says that the approval would be not injurious to public health, that the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance would not be affected in a substantially adverse manner, and the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance would result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. I'm going to address these 3 very quickly for the board. I'll try not to waste too much of your time, but I would like to address those 3 very quickly. The first requirement, which says that the approval of the land use variance cannot be injurious to public health or general welfare, we believe has been met. Bryant's carport is located over an existing slab of concrete that he's used to park his vehicles for some time now. And as I kind of summarize in the memo there, if you read down, my understanding of why these setback requirements exist is so that these, buildings or accessory structures that are built at the front of the property won't interfere with utility easements. I mean, that's the primary reason for these setback requirements. Right now, the only utility that could possibly be affected would be, Mr. Spencer's electric. The only utility close to his property would be a light pole out in the front of the property, and I do have an aerial view of the property and some pictures of Mr. Spencer's carport that I'm going to pass around for you guys to look at. I know she already provided you a picture of the carport, but that's the aerial view. I only have one of those, so I apologize. I do have a couple different pictures of his carport there, and you can see the light pole in the front. That's the closest utility to Mr. Spencer's property. All those lines run underground. There's no overhead electric or telephone wires that this property or this carport could possibly interfere with. So we don't believe that, approval of this land use would be injurious to public health or the general welfare of the community, because we don't, believe that it's interfering with the reason and existence of these setback requirements to begin with. I would also like to bring up, that Mr. Spencer was also told that at the last board meeting that if he removed the shed from his backyard, that the set-off requirements would not be an issue. So my contention would be that, are these setback requirements really an issue at all if, you know, the mere removal of the accessory building in the backyard would be okay for the Board of Zoning Appeals? You know, is that really an issue that we're concerned about if we're willing to agree to that? And if not, then it seems like the real issue is, you know, the accessory structure requirement. You know, and our argument would be that Brian's use of the carport would do nothing to impinge upon, you know, the goals of what those accessory structure requirements are. You know, those accessory structure requirements are in place so that people don't, you know, build buildings too close to the front of, you know, access ways, so that, you know, people don't, run unlicensed businesses or, you know, use any other, you know, I guess, they don't build buildings that don't have compliant uses under the city's, you know, requirements. At this point, I don't see a way in which the carport, you know, would interfere with those structures. It is set back, you know, not according to the setback requirements, but it is 12 to 15 feet, you know, back from the front of the property there, if you can see on that picture. I want to move on to the second requirement. So the second requirement is that the use and value of the area adjacent to the property, including the variance, cannot be affected in a substantially adverse manner, which I think we've met here too. You know, I don't know that Mr. Spencer's carport is adversely affecting the property value of any neighbor. In fact, I think, you know, to some degree, it could possibly improve neighbors' property value. Mr. Spencer spent over $7,000 on this carport. You know, as you can see in the picture, it's not trashy. It's not something that's hard to see. It's not something that's hard on the eyes. If anything, I think it's something that's likely to improve Mr. Spencer's own property value. And as they say, rising tides raise all ships. You know, if Mr. Spencer's property value is likely to, you know, increase from this, I would argue that, you know, the surrounding property owners is likely to increase as well. The last requirement, the third one, which talks about whether or not the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulties, has to do with whether or not there's going to be a significant economic injury caused by this. You know, whether or not, you know, Brian's requirement to, you know, comply with these zoning ordinances are going to create practical difficulties for him is the question. Practical difficulties, you know, as defined by, you know, several different BZAs, not necessarily, I couldn't find a definition where you guys had set out, you know, the term, you know, before, but several other counties, I pulled from Monroe County, Morgan County, also Marion County, for their definition of what practical difficulties are. And they define practical difficulties as economic injury that arise from the strict application of the zoning ordinance to the existing parcel of property, and economic injury that is not as significant as the injury associated with the hardship. Meaning that, you know, what Brian is going to incur by not having this, you know, variance in place so that he can have his carport is going to be worse than the cost that he would have to have in complying with it, if that kind of makes some sense to you. You know, as far as the first, you know, part of that, those two requirements, the economic injury on Brian, if he has to, you know, comply with this carport setback requirement, is going to be pretty severe. You know, the recommendation from the BZA at the last meeting was that Brian build the carport next to his property right now as it stands, so next to the existing garage. If he did that, he'd be required to level off the property. You know, Brian's had some estimates on this, which I do not have copies of with me, but, you know, we believe that it'd be multiple $1,000s to level off that property. You know, the other concern would be is that if he's forced to put that carport back in line with the structure of the house, it's going to create some foundational concerns for the property. So, you know, if he has to move that back, there's potential that it could jeopardize his foundation. So there's to be more work associated with that, more cost to put the carport, you know, where the BZA is suggesting that it be put. The last thing I want to cover, it's just summing back to Mr. Spencer's disability. You know, the reason that we're requesting, or he requested this variance originally, as I made, you know, a comment to the board at first, is to make sure that Mr. Spencer can still go to work. He wants to be able to get to his car in the morning when it's raining, when it's wet, when it's snowing out, so that he doesn't have to worry about these fall concerns that he has. Last year, when he had the carport in place, you know, so up until this February, it's the first winter Mr. Spencer had where he did not have a fall accident. I think making this simple adjustment, or, you know, allowing for this variance is an easy way to keep a member of society who's already a productive member of society still as such. My concern would be that if he doesn't have this available to him, he could have another accident, he could be injured, and as a result, you know, no longer able to work. I guess the question that I would have at that point is, would we rather somebody be paying taxes and be a productive member of society, or would we want somebody who, whose income is being relied on or is coming from said tax dollars that I just referred to? That's all I have for the board, unless Brian would like to make a comment. Thank you for your time. And I do have, I apologize, I do have some pictures here as well I want to hand out. So these are additional carport that are in Greensburg that Mr. Spencer has found that he does not believe are in compliance with the setback requirements. And then I also have some additional accessory violations which Mr. Spencer has found in the surrounding neighborhood as well, that he believes that these properties are existing, where there's been some unequal enforcement.
Part of this could have been avoided had the proper procedure been followed in the first place, and none of us would be here dealing with this. There are things that you are supposed to do as a citizen when you want to build on your property, when you want to add something to it. You just can't go out and throw something up and expect everything to be okay. We're only considering this variance because he didn't do that.
So I guess my question would be that, are you referring to a permit? Is that the suggestion, that when you say the correct procedure?
Okay, at the beginning, when you go to do something like that, you go to the building office here, Sarah's office, and ask them, what do I need to do to put this up legally? And that would have all been explained to you, and you would have had, if it was going to be in this location, then you would have had applied for your variance, which we could have considered. But you're coming to us after the fact. You're telling me that he's having a hardship that he created. I'm not creating a hardship for him. I'm just asking that we enforce the existing rules. He's creating a hardship because he's already spent the money to build the carport without going through the proper procedures. That's my point in this matter.
Okay. And just so we're clear, you're saying that the proper procedure would have been to get a permit or not?
To go to Sarah's office and talk to her and find out where it was going to sit, and then if a variance was required, to apply for it before you build the building. You don't, it's like shutting the door after the cow got out of the barn. It's too late. I mean, I'm sorry that this is going to cost him money, but as a board, we didn't make him cost money. He decided to do that on his own, not anyone else.
I addressed that with you in the beginning.
And I would just say, across the board, I'm not aware that that's a requirement of approval of a zoning permit, or a zoning variance, as far as I'm aware, at least pursuant to Indiana code. So I understand the concern, and obviously we want to make sure that people are following proper procedure, but I don't say where the procedure's been violated.
I would say there's probably two points that I would make. First, I do think that Mr. Runnebaum was correct. The code that I cited to you earlier was for use variance, and this probably falls under a design standard variance, which is 918.5.
And I do have copies of that code if the board would like to review it.
So I do think that his standard is correct. In terms of what is the quote-unquote proper procedure, there is not a specific and set out Indiana code site that I can tell you that this is a specific proper procedure. I can tell you that this issue and whether or not you can do it beforehand is certainly going to be addressed in the unified code that the city is working on. That new ordinance is certainly going to have some very specific language as to what you have to do, because it's going to be governed at the local level, and Mr. Runnebaum's right, we don't have a specific way to do it. But to Mr. Middendorf's point, he had already built the thing before he actually came and asked you for permission to build the thing. So it's kind of like you hit the golf ball and broke the window in your car and then said, hey, can I hit the golf ball? And that's whether or not that is proper or improper is a question of law. I agree with him. I do not believe there is a specific legal standard. So the question before you is whether or not he has met the burden that the petitioner has under that code, that specific code provision that he cited, and whether or not you want to make that finding. And he is correct. The finding that you're looking at is the approval will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare, that the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner, and that the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property.
I think that second point is the one I have the issue with. You know, you're saying that it is not decreasing the property value, but I think that's pretty subjective. I mean, I personally, doesn't matter, but I think you could argue that it is. I think neighbors have argued that it does decrease property value. It's not something that you see in that neighborhood. Yeah.
And I would just maybe reach out to Miss Sarah. I mean, I don't know, you know, like I said, I mean, have there been complaints regarding neighbors' property value? Is that the concern?
I would let Sarah address if the board.
If I may come up
Yeah.
here.
Thank you.
First of all, back when Mr. Spencer applied for the variance in February, I received about 6 phone calls from people. There was concern of they didn't want to come before, you know, for neighbor issues or anything like that. And I believe that you received a copy of that at that meeting, and then again this evening. To back up, where a lot of the calls that were made were complaints. I mean, you know, it's an eyesore, there's not any more out in that area. You know, I did look covenants up. We do not govern covenants, and actually out there in that whole addition, you can't have tents, trailers, barns, anything like that, any of those kind of structures. But again, we do not govern the covenants. That's normally an HOA, and I don't believe there's an active HOA. But back into what Mr. Spencer also said about, or Mr. Runnable, I'm sorry, said about Mr. Spencer saying that he was told if he got rid of his shed that he could have the carport. He was told by me that because that was another variance as well, to have multiple accessory structures, if you got rid of the shed and you moved the carport back to be able to meet the setbacks, then he wouldn't have to get a variance as long as the setbacks were met. It wasn't said that if he removed the shed, then he could have the carport where it is.
Is that, and I can't remember exactly, but the original variance was for the setbacks, correct?
It was for the setbacks,
Front
yes, and the additional accessory structure, yes.
Okay.
Because I, at that time, asked Mr. Spencer why he doesn't use his garage. Why is he going to come across the driveway if that's to me, and park in his garage, which is easier access. It wasn't making sense to me where the carport is and what he's wanting it for.
Question I have is, and I know Beacon is not 100% accurate, but even according to this overhead picture, the lot line is running through the carport. So is that in some kind of right-of-way? Is that in I mean, we talked about utility right-of-ways. Does the city have any right-of-ways?
I'm gonna ask Ron to maybe shed a little light on that, but yes, the city does have right-of-ways.
Alan, I have not studied the Charles Lee 2 plat, but I am reasonably confident that there is platted right-of-way there, and that platted right-of-way would extend to the property line as depicted on Beacon.
So the setbacks would be from the property line is what he was wanting. Did he go from the center of the street, or what? How did he come to this conclusion right there?
To put it right there?
Yeah, just over that pad?
You have to ask him.
You could probably direct that to.
I just put it over what
On
the
the
existing
existing
concrete pad, yes. Yes, that was,
From my understanding, and We can't get away with part of a right of way, can we?
No. No, if you're.
We can't variance through that, correct?
You can't variance through a right of way, no. You can give him a variance to the setback and you can give him a variance to the structure, but if he's infringing upon your right of way, that's a separate quiet title issue. No. Okay, that sounds fun. The subsequent question would be whether or not your acceptance of the setback variance provides tacit agreement that you are acquiescing to his ownership of your right-of-way. If it does in fact infringe upon the right-of-way of the city where it is sitting, that's a whole different ball of wax. I mean, it's just different than a variance. Do you know, I mean, I don't know if it sits on a right-of-way or not. Does it look like it does? And then the other part is now you're dealing with being in the Charles Lee, the subdivision. Now the question then becomes, if you put it on top of an existing pad and that existing pad has been there long enough for it to constitute an adverse possession, then you may have a different, I think Mr. Runneman may have asked his question.
Well, I think Mr. Spencer's contention would be that it's not on the property line anyways. You know, at least based on our conference, I think there's about 4 or 5 feet between the property line and where, you know, the carport and the existing pad actually are. So I don't believe that it is in the way of the right of way.
Okay. If it does not cross over the property line and is not in the right of way, which to the extent that you're giving a setback variance, you can condition that he's entitled to the variance so long as, I mean, I suppose you could ask that a survey be done to ensure that it's not infringing upon the city's right of way. You know, so it would be, he's entitled to the variance contingent upon presenting a survey to this body illustrating that the property line does not, that the carport does not step over the property line and into a right of way. I don't think that would be an unreasonable condition to place on a setback variance.
The concrete pad is not any larger than what it was. It's exactly the same. I made no variation in that whatsoever.
Right. So the question would be, is the concrete pad fully on his property? Presumably, it is, but
I would actually suggest the opposite, Chris. It's common practice for driveways and parking pads to extend to the street pavement across the city right of way.
Well, and I would certainly defer to you on that. You deal with way more of them than I do. So I don't know the answer to your question, and you won't know the answer until you have somebody survey the property and determine where exactly the property line is and whether or not that concrete pad infringes. And then, like I said, I would suspect that Mr. Ronnebaum seems like a very intelligent attorney who's presented a very good case to you thus far. He's probably going to tell us if he has an adverse possession claim or not. But depending on how long, and I don't know how long Mr. Spencer's lived in the home, but if that has always infringed upon our right of way, that could be problematic in terms of property ownership and quiet title.
But the concrete pad has been there forever, but the carport has not been there forever.
Yeah, but the carport sits on top of the concrete pad. If there's an infringement, it's the concrete pad.
What would be the difference between the pad and the driveway?
Well, I'd have to look and see whether or not the.
So anybody who, I don't know if I.
Well, as we say, I won't tell you that I've done the research to be able to tell you one way or another. If it is a driveway, then it would fall under a use easement, which generally speaking, if you only have one form of ingress or egress into your property, then that constitutes a prescriptive use easement. So most driveways fall under a prescriptive use easement. But you get much farther down and y'all are just asking law school questions.
I don't think you could reasonably argue that anybody that has a driveway has adverse possession, has taken adverse possession of the city or county's right of way.
But I think they generally have a prescriptive easement. So it's not adverse because it's a prescriptive easement. So, and that's, I think the only difference I draw in my head as I'm shooting off the hip from this is that it's a concrete pad, which means it's not intended for ingress or egress, it's intended to stop. I don't know. That's a very interesting legal question that I think is probably outside the scope of what you're talking about. But to the extent that you're asking whether or not it infringes upon the right of way, I think you're gonna have to have a survey to know for sure if it's infringing on the city's right of way. So, do anybody else have any other interesting questions?
Whose responsibility was the survey?
It's a good question.
Mr. Spencer would volunteer to get the survey himself, he says, if need be.
There you go. That guy. Now, and I certainly hate to do this because I fully respect how expensive Mr. Ronaldo's time is and what Mr. Spencer is going through to try to do this. The other thing you could do is you could either condition this upon the survey coming back showing that it is not in the right of way, or you could table a vote on the variance pending submission of a survey.
I don't know, are we ready for conversation or discussion, or do we want to open it up to the, I don't.
Well, as you say, you might first, do you have any further questions for Mr. Ronaldo?
Thank you for your time.
Then I think you could certainly open it up to public discussion and then discuss it amongst yourself.
You need to ask the audience first.
Is there anybody in the audience that has any thing that they would not like to say on this?
Can I ask a question, or am I loud or not?
Yeah. Ms. Hamer would like to be recognized.
My question, I guess, is why are we having a carport there versus not parking a vehicle in our garage that is attached to our home? Because again, I say it doesn't make sense if you're worried about falling and stuff to come out, walk clear across your driveway to a carport when you can walk out of your house into a garage, into a vehicle. That's my only question.
To me, those are the two. I'm not convinced that it presents a hardship, because I think you can use the garage, like Sarah said, versus using the carport, and honestly, you're gonna have less hardship, less of a risk of a fall, I would think.
Can Mr. Spencer reply to that? He would like to give a response to that question if possible.
Sure.
Okay, if you want to go up there, Byron.
Sure. The main reason that
I considered that. My wife was handicapped from pretty much when we got married, which was in 1988. She had a vehicle that, it was her vehicle. She drove the vehicle. I drove it on rare occasion, but it was hers. It fit in her garage, and it fit in there very nicely. My vehicle, on the other hand, is basically built for me. I'm an old farm boy. I drive a pickup truck, and my pickup truck won't fit in my garage. My garage is 21 foot deep. My truck is 21.5 foot deep. There's no way. I have a handicap carrier on the back that it extends out another 4 feet beyond that with a ramp that folds down, and even at that, I wouldn't have enough room to get my mobility device up on there. So that's the main reason that I did that. And that's the main reason I can't use my garage. I've got a step in my garage that if I could get my vehicle in there, would impede it, because it sits right in the most awkward place it could. So even if I could get my vehicle in there, I still couldn't get into my house. So that's one main reason that I did that. So I don't know, I mean, I don't feel as though I have to trade down on a vehicle to do that. Like I said, I've always had a truck, it's the only thing I've ever had, and I'm probably always gonna have one. So, that's kind of where I'm at with that. If that matters.
Yeah, I mean, it addresses the hardship issue. My second concern is property value and what it does to the neighboring properties, which.
Well, and again, Ms. Hamer said that, you know, she's had various phone calls. I've talked to all of my neighbors. Where they were less than honest with me, that's on them, I don't know. But they were all actually very supportive of me. I had not one negative comment. And so whether those neighbors were over on another street, I have no idea. I was not privy to that. I was never there was never any transparency to me about who complained or who wrote in or who called in. So, but as far as the neighbors that are concerned, and even neighbors down the street from me, I've heard nothing but positive from them. So, like I said, if they're telling a different story, that's on them. I can't attest to any of that. But I can attest that, like I said, what I have been told was very positive. And again, as Mr. Rinnebaum pointed out, all said and told in the project, I mean, I've got about $15,000 invested in this. And I understand Mr. Middendorf's view here. I really do. I mean, I was a contractor in this town for almost 40 years, so I know what it's like to put the cart before the horse. And I've had to go chase the horse down more than once, and I've had to put the cow back in the barn. I mean, it just to summarize, you know, and I'm not asking for anything special. You know, when I did this, I had advice from a city of Greensburg subcontractor, and I asked him if I needed to get a permit, and he assured me there was no reason to get a permit. He'd done dozens of these, and nobody ever had to get a permit. So I took it on bad advice. That's on me, and I wholeheartedly apologize for that. Again, you know, it doesn't put the horse back in the barn, you know. But I'm willing to try to do what I can, because this carport has been a very good asset to me. I've had more than one fall, and I've lost work because of it. Most notably, I've lost 2 weeks of work for a fall on my driveway, simply for that reason. And this last winter, of course, it wasn't, you know, a bad winter, but what snow, ice, and inclement weather we did have, it was easy for me to walk 8 feet out to my carport and get in my vehicle without risk of injury or anything like that. And that means a lot to me, because I'm bound to be in some kind of a mobility device. And matter of fact, my rheumatologist has actually wrote me a prescription to get one. So, I mean, I'm trying to be more proactive here than, you know, being behind the 8 ball. I don't want this to sneak up on me, and I'm not prepared for it. I want to be prepared. And so, again, that's where I'm at with the whole thing. Again, you know, my apologies to the board. If I would have known that and again, I should have asked, because like I said, I'm a contractor. Well, I had to give up my business simply because of my medical condition. But, you know, I've been to the carpet with many people over permit issues, you know, and I've refused to do a lot of jobs because of that. But, you know, when the student becomes, or the teacher becomes a student, then, you know, you're in the learning process, and you can never be too old to learn. So, again, that's as much as I can offer.
Any additional questions for
I
Mr.
do, I have a couple, if I could, please. It would appear to me that you're gonna walk across, and I understand the mobility issue, and I understand falling, believe me, I do. But it appears to me you've got to go out your door, walk across the driveway. And if I'm not mistaken, there is a curb between your driveway and the carport, yay high.
Well, it steps down into.
Okay, so you've got to go across the driveway, step down into that to get in your car.
Well, I come out my side door
Okay,
and it's 8 feet to the edge. 2 steps down. And
but so you're coming out your side door out of the garage,
Correct.
which has, before you said there's a step in your garage, which is a problem for you parking
Yeah.
access.
Yes, there's 2
So-
steps from the garage into the house.
So, and that was an issue before, but now you get down that step to come out the side door to get to your truck.
Well, it's not an issue from my house to my garage because I have rails and I have grab bars that I installed for my wife, which unfortunately for me, I'm able to use as well. I haven't got to it yet, but I'm going to put up a rail down the 2 steps into my carport for that. My sidewalk is heated, so I don't have to worry about that. I don't ever have to worry about, I just literally flip a switch and granted, I got a little work to do there, but,
So what leads you to believe that moving that carport back next to your house could lead to foundation issues?
because I would have to have it excavated down about 3 feet.
Which your garage was probably excavated that far to begin with, to pour the concrete for your garage, yes?
Probably for the footer.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. The